My ex took my millionaire life after the divorce, but she didn't take one detail into account. I was once a man who had it all. A sprawling mansion overlooking the city, luxury cars lining the driveway, a bank account that seemed to grow overnight, and a wife who, at least on paper, promised to share every bit of it with me. My name is James Carter, and this is the story of how I lost everything in a bitter divorce, only to find a way back from the ashes when the world told me I was finished. It all began when Emily, my wife of 8 years, decided that our marriage was over. She said it calmly in court, but behind that polite veneer was a storm of greed and resentment I hadn't seen coming. From the moment she filed for divorce, it was clear that she wasn't interested in fairness. She wanted everything. The house, the cars, my investments, the jewelry, everything that I'd spent years building. At first, I thought I could negotiate, that our years together counted for something. But Emily's lawyers were ruthless. They painted me as the villain, a cold, selfish man who cared only for money and power. The truth was more complicated, but in the courtroom, truth is often the first casualty. The hearings dragged on for months. I remember sitting there, watching as the judge signed order after order, handing over my life to her. The house I designed with my own hands was hers now. The fleet of cars, hers. The business accounts that had been my pride and joy were frozen or transferred under her name. I was left with nothing but a thin envelope, a paltry settlement barely enough to cover my rent. My name was erased from everything I'd built. Walking out of that courtroom, a man who once stood tall, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt. The media had a field day, painting the story as the millionaire taken down by his scheming wife. Friends disappeared, and the business world that once bowed at my feet now looked through me as if I were invisible. But even in that moment of utter devastation, something inside me refused to die. I didn't know how I would do it, but I promised myself I would rise again. Not just to get back what I lost, but to prove that no court, no person, no betrayal could define who I was. The first weeks after the divorce were the hardest. I was living in a cramped, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, far from the penthouse I once called home. My clothes were gone, replaced by the few things I had managed to save in a suitcase. My bank accounts were nearly empty, and the business I had poured my soul into was now out of my control. At night, I lay awake listening to the silence of a life stripped bare. The weight of failure crushed me. Friends who had once celebrated my successes no longer returned my calls. I was isolated, humiliated, and broken. But that emptiness gave me clarity. When everything is taken away, you realize what truly matters. Not the flashy cars, the jewelry, or the sprawling mansion. It's your will to fight. Your ability to keep moving forward when the world tries to bury you. I started small. I reached out to a few old contacts who had respected me before the scandal. Most doors were closed, but one or two cracked open. I took a job as a consultant, advising small companies on business strategy. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was a fraction of what I was used to, but it was honest work. It was a beginning. Every dollar I earned, I saved. Every waking hour was spent networking, learning, planning. I went back to basics, reading books about business, personal finance, and negotiation. I knew if I was ever going to reclaim my life, I had to be smarter, stronger, and more resilient than before. I also began to rebuild myself mentally. I saw a therapist to work through the betrayal and the humiliation. It was brutal, peeling back layers of pain I had buried deep but necessary. I couldn't move forward if I was still chained to the past. Meanwhile, Emily was living in the mansion, flaunting her new life on social media. She flaunted the luxury I had lost, the expensive vacations, the designer clothes. It was a reminder of what I had lost, but also a fuel to my fire. One day, I stumbled upon an old business idea I had shelved years ago. It was risky, but I realized it was my chance to start fresh. With the little savings I had, I began laying the groundwork for a new company, one that would be built from the ground up with me at the helm. Starting over wasn't easy. Every step felt like climbing a mountain while carrying a boulder. But this time, I was fighting not just for money or status. I was fighting for my dignity, my identity. I poured every waking hour into the new company, which focused on sustainable real estate development, a sector I'd always believed had potential but never pursued seriously. I networked tirelessly, pitching my vision to investors, often facing rejection after rejection. Some of them knew about my past and weren't willing to take a chance on the divorced millionaire who lost it all. But there were a few who saw past the headlines. A small group of investors believed in my idea and my commitment. With their backing, I hired a small team, many of whom were young, hungry professionals looking for a fresh start just like me. The early projects were modest, renovating a few rundown properties and turning them into eco-friendly homes. It was far from the luxury developments I once managed, but it was real. I was building something tangible with my own hands and grit. Every morning I woke up sore and exhausted, but filled with a strange new hope. I was no longer just surviving, I was fighting back. However, Emily wasn't going to let me rebuild so easily. One afternoon, as I was finalizing a deal, I heard about a new legal move she was making, claiming that some of the new business assets I was accumulating belonged to her as well. She hired lawyers to dig up every possible connection, aiming to put a stop to my comeback before it even started. I realized then that the divorce hadn't been the end of the battle. It was just the beginning of a war. I had to be smart. Every move I made from that point on was calculated. I hired my own legal team, better prepared, and with no intention of giving in to her greed again. The personal attacks escalated too. Emily spread rumors about me, questioned my character publicly, trying to isolate me further. But the more she pushed, the more people started to see her for who she really was, not the victim she portrayed, but someone blinded by greed and spite. The fight drained me, but it also steeled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting to reclaim my story, to show the world that no matter how low you fall, you can rise again. And then, just when I thought the worst was behind me, something unexpected happened, a chance encounter that would change everything. It happened on a rainy evening, the kind that makes the city's lights blur and the world feel heavy. I was at a networking event for entrepreneurs, exhausted but determined to make connections. That's when I met Olivia. She was unlike anyone I'd met before, sharp, confident, and with an energy that cut through the noise. Olivia was a venture capitalist, known for backing underdogs and bold ideas. When I pitched my sustainable real estate concept, she didn't just listen. She challenged me, questioned me, and pushed me to think bigger. Why settle for renovation? She asked. Why not build a community? Something that changes the way people live for good? Her words stuck with me. For the first time, I saw my business not just as a way to rebuild my life, but as a mission to make a real difference. Olivia became my partner, both professionally and, eventually, personally. There was no grand romance, just a steady connection built on mutual respect and shared vision. She wasn't interested in my past or my fortune. She wanted the truth and the fight I was willing to put in. Together, we rebranded the company, expanding our projects and attracting new investors. The work was hard, the hours long, but the progress was undeniable. The first housing community we built was a modest success, but it was the foundation of something far greater. Meanwhile, the legal battle with Emily dragged on. She kept trying to claw back any success I found. But now, with Olivia's support and a better legal team, I was no longer defenseless. We fought every claim, and bit by bit, her power diminished. I remember the day Emily's final lawsuit was dismissed. It felt like a weight lifting off my chest, but more than that, it was validation. The man who had been broken and left with nothing was still standing. Yet, even with the legal battles won and the business growing, the scars of betrayal ran deep. I struggled with trust, with opening myself to others. Every time I let my guard down, a shadow of the past crept back in. One night, after a long day, Olivia and I were sitting on the balcony of my small, rented apartment. The city stretched below us in a sea of lights, and I finally allowed myself to speak about the pain I'd carried. I lost everything, Liv. Not just money or possessions. I lost the person I thought I was. She reached out, took my hand, and said something I'd never forget. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. Her words struck a chord deep inside me. It was the beginning of a healing I didn't know I needed. But just when I thought I was finally moving forward, a secret from Emily's side surfaced, a revelation that threatened to unravel everything I had rebuilt. The secret came to me on a cold autumn morning. One of my contacts, still sympathetic despite the past chaos, whispered about Emily's next move, and it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about something far darker: fraud, manipulation, even illegal transfers of assets that she had hidden away during the divorce proceedings. For years, she had been siphoning money from accounts we both shared, moving valuables into offshore accounts, selling property under the radar. This settlement I had accepted wasn't the whole truth. It was just the tip of a vast iceberg. My blood ran cold. I realized that Emily had played me like a fool. While I was struggling to rebuild my life from scratch, she had been quietly amassing wealth far beyond what the courts awarded her. And now, she had more than enough power to try to crush me again if I dared to push back. But this time, I was prepared. I gathered evidence, documents, financial records, discreet testimonies from former employees and accountants who had worked with her. Piece by piece, the truth emerged like a dark tapestry of lies and deceit. The weight of betrayal hit me harder than ever. Not only had she taken everything I owned, she had deliberately tried to destroy me from behind the scenes. I could have reported her quietly, let the law handle her in silence. But no, after all the pain and humiliation, I wanted her to feel the sting of justice. I wanted the world to know. I hired a new legal team, specialists in financial crimes, and launched a countercase. The media caught wind of the story. Headlines shifted from "Millionaire loses everything to greedy wife" to "Millionaire fights back against ex-wife's secret empire of lies." Public opinion started to turn. People who had once doubted me now watched closely, rooting for the comeback story they thought impossible. Emily, for all her pride and cunning, underestimated my resolve. The court hearings were brutal. She denied everything, painted me as paranoid and obsessed. But the evidence was damning. Offshore accounts, forged documents, secret deals. I watched as the facade she built crumbled piece by piece. Finally, after months of legal warfare, the judge ruled in my favor. Emily was ordered to return a significant portion of the hidden assets, pay hefty fines, and face criminal investigation for fraud. It wasn't just a financial victory, it was a moral one. I remember sitting in the courtroom, heart pounding, as the verdict was read. For the first time in years, I felt whole again. But even with justice served, the wounds of betrayal don't heal overnight. The fight had taken everything from me: my trust, my peace, my faith in people. And yet, somehow I was stronger. After the court victory, rebuilding my life took on a new meaning. The money I recovered wasn't just a lifeline. It was a symbol of survival, proof that I had fought through the darkest storm and emerged stronger. But the scars Emily left behind weren't only financial. The emotional betrayal had cut deeper than I could have imagined. For months, I wrestled with anger and grief, sometimes wondering if I'd ever be able to trust again. I threw myself into my work with Olivia's steady support. Our company grew steadily, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to envision a future not defined by loss, but by possibility. Olivia never pressured me to move on faster than I was ready. She gave me space when I needed it, and held my hand when I faltered. Slowly, the walls around my heart began to crumble. One night, as we were reviewing plans for a new community project, Olivia asked me something simple yet profound. "What do you want, James? Not the money or the success. What do you want from life?" The question stopped me cold. I realized I'd spent so long chasing after what I lost, I hadn't thought about what I truly wanted. I looked at her and said, "Peace, and to build something that lasts. Not just for me, but for others. A legacy that means something." That night marked a turning point. I started using my resources to give back, supporting charities, investing in social causes, and mentoring young entrepreneurs who, like me, had faced setbacks. The man who had lost everything became a man who built not only businesses but bridges between people, communities, and dreams. Yet, even as I grew stronger, A part of me never forgot the bitter lessons from Emily's betrayal. I became wary of trusting too easily, guarding my heart and my secrets with newfound wisdom. Then one afternoon, out of the blue, I received a message from Emily herself. She wanted to meet. The message was short, almost cold in its simplicity. "We need to talk. It's time." I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding but mind racing. After everything, the betrayal, the court battles, the years of pain, why now? What did she possibly want? Against every instinct, I agreed to meet. I figured if I was to find any real closure, it had to come from facing her one last time. We met in a quiet cafe, far from the mansions and courtroom drama. Emily looked different. Not the polished, confident woman I remembered, but someone exhausted and hollow, as if the weight of her own choices had finally caught up with her. Her eyes met mine with something I hadn't expected: remorse. "I'm sorry," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I was blinded by greed and anger. I lost sight of what really mattered: us, the years we shared. I thought I needed to win to prove something, but all I did was destroy us both." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Years of anger surged through me, screaming for revenge, for closure, for answers. But beneath it all, a quiet part of me wanted to believe her. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why after everything?" She sighed, her eyes tearing up. "Because I'm tired, James. I've lost more than money or possessions. I lost myself. And maybe, if we can find a way to forgive each other, we can both find peace." The conversation that followed was raw and painful. We talked about the past, the lies, the broken trust. For the first time, we saw each other not as enemies, but as two people who had been deeply hurt. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but I knew holding on to hatred would only chain me to the past forever. When I left that cafe, the sky was clearing after a storm. The city felt different, as if a heavy fog had lifted. For the first time since the divorce, I felt the possibility of freedom. In the weeks after that meeting, my life took on a new rhythm, one shaped not by bitterness, but by cautious hope. I didn't forget what had happened, but I stopped letting it define me. Instead, I focused on building a future that was mine, free from the shadows of the past. Olivia and I grew closer, our partnership deepening beyond business into something more personal and profound. She had been my anchor through the storm, and now she was becoming my reason to believe in happiness again. My company flourished. The sustainable communities we developed were recognized for innovation and social impact, earning awards and attracting attention from major investors. We were no longer just rebuilding, we were thriving. But the journey wasn't without challenges. The wounds from the past sometimes flared up unexpectedly: trust issues, moments of doubt, fears that the darkness would return. I leaned on therapy and meditation, finding new tools to cope and grow. I also reconnected with family and old friends I'd lost along the way. Some relationships were mended, others left behind, but all helped me see that I wasn't alone. One evening, after a successful launch event for a new project, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. From losing everything to standing on the cusp of real success. The journey had been brutal, but transformative. That night, Olivia surprised me with a quiet celebration, just the two of us, away from the crowds and noise. She handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a simple silver ring, etched with the phrase, "Stronger than before." She smiled and said, "This isn't just about us. It's about everything you've survived and everything you're still building." I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling the weight and the promise of it. In that moment, I realized something vital. I wasn't just a man who lost everything. I was a man who had found himself again. But life, as always, had one last twist waiting, a test that would push me to the very limits of my newfound strength. It was a calm spring morning when I received the call that shook me to my core. The voice on the other end was tight, urgent, from one of my company's top managers. "There's been a breach," she said. "Someone inside has been leaking confidential information to a competitor. We're facing potential sabotage." My heart sank. After all I'd been through, after clawing my way back, someone was trying to destroy everything again, but this time, the threat was from within. The investigation began immediately. We tightened security, poured over every email, every transaction, every meeting. The betrayal cut deeper than Emily's because it came from people I had trusted, colleagues who had shared in the vision and struggle. Days stretched into sleepless nights. Olivia and I worked side by side, trying to protect what we had built. Finally, the truth emerged. A close associate, a man I had personally hired and trusted, had been feeding secrets to a rival company eager to crush us. The revelation was a gut punch. I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. But this time, I reacted differently, not with despair, but with resolve. I confronted him in my office. The man tried to justify his actions, greed, jealousy, fear. But none of it mattered. The trust was broken. I terminated his contract and reported the incident to the authorities. I made it clear to my team that loyalty and integrity were non-negotiable. The company survived the attack, but the scars lingered. The incident reminded me that rebuilding isn't a straight path. It's filled with unexpected hurdles and tests of character. Yet, through every challenge, I grew stronger and more focused. And when I looked at Olivia, at the team we had built, and at the community projects blossoming across the city, I knew this fight, this life was worth every scar. I had lost everything once, but now I had something far more valuable, a second chance, earned through pain, perseverance, and an unbreakable will. Years later, standing on a rooftop terrace of the new headquarters we had built, I looked out over the city, a city that once felt like the backdrop to my ruin, but had become the canvas of my redemption. The man who lost his fortune and his name had become someone new, not defined by wealth or possessions, but by resilience, purpose, and the ability to forgive, not just others, but himself. Emily was a distant memory, a chapter closed. I never sought revenge beyond the courtroom battles. Instead, I chose growth. Her greed had once threatened to consume me, but it only fueled the fire to rebuild and transform. I held Olivia's hand, feeling the steady warmth that had been my anchor through every storm. Together, we had created more than a business. We had forged a community, a family, a legacy. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what happened. I tell them no, because losing everything stripped away illusions and forced me to confront who I really was. It was painful, humiliating, and terrifying, but it was also necessary. The world may try to break you. People may betray you when you least expect it, but your spirit, that cannot be taken unless you let it go. If you ever find yourself at rock bottom, remember, from the deepest falls rise the strongest warriors. And I am living proof.